listening to the Life Edit Project podcast, where busy, ambitious high achievers get the tools they need to fight overwhelm and overthinking with balance, self-mastery, and a positive mindset. I'm your host, Elizabeth Burrows. I'm serving up bite-sized truth bombs in a judgment-free zone based on my perspective as a life coach, wife, mom, and recovering overachiever. We keep it real over here, which usually means some combination of insightful, entertaining, and a hot mess express. So, if you're looking for perfection, look elsewhere. But if you're still with me, let's dig into this week's episode. Good day, good people. I'm so glad you're here. Listen, I'm glad I'm here because this episode almost didn't happen, or at least it almost didn't happen today. It would have been so easy for me to just not do this episode or to get it in later and publish this later in this week. But I strive to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So I had to show up and get this done. It was important, critical. It was necessary that I got this episode recorded and published on time. If you're new around here, Wednesdays are when new episodes of this podcast drops. So it was important that I got this episode to you on a Wednesday because today's episode is about discipline. And I would have absolutely no business talking to you about discipline if I couldn't muster up enough discipline to make this show happen today. So here's a fun fact that I learned. Half of all podcasts have 14 or fewer episodes. So having the discipline to get to this episode 15 today, is kind of a big deal. And I'm super proud of myself. It means that I have literally made it further than half of the podcasts out there that exist. And I'm proud of myself, y'all. So yes, we're going there today. We're talking about discipline. We're going to jump into the deep end of the conversation as we continue with part 3 of our Self-Care Essentials mini-series. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to my listener bae of the week. So if you're new around here, you wouldn't know that I love all of my lovely listeners and you all hold a special place in my heart. But you gotta leave a 5-star rating and review over on Apple Podcasts to be a listener bae. So today's listener bae has the username MissAnn5501, and the title of her review is Good Food for Thought. Here is what she said. I don't listen to many podcasts, but I do look forward to this one each week now. Elizabeth is easy to listen to, and she talks about things in a way that make me think. I highly recommend her. Thank you, MissAnn5501. You're a real one, and I appreciate you. So remember, y'all, ratings and reviews are the best way for you all to talk back to me and give me feedback. Otherwise, this podcast is just a one-way conversation, and I can't tell if you're picking up what I'm laying down. Also, reviews really help this show get in front of new people and more listeners, and they help those newbies know why they should tune in and exactly what to expect. So spread the love and leave a review if you've ever gotten anything valuable from any episode of this podcast. And if you don't know how to do that, you can find step-by-step instructions over on my website at lifeeditproject.com/podcast. And of course, I will have that linked up in the show notes for you because I like to make things easy. And I have just one more piece of light housekeeping here. So we're getting close, really, really close to 500 downloads. And I want to celebrate with y'all when we hit that milestone because I like to celebrate. And also because I couldn't get there to that milestone without you, my lovely listeners. So here's what I'm going to do. Are you ready? I'm going to give away a free 30-minute coaching call to one lucky listener. And then I'm going to share the recording of that coaching call with you all here on the podcast, and I'll publish it as like a special podcast episode. So I haven't sorted out all of the details yet on what you'll need to do to enter that giveaway yet. So please stay tuned. I will share more, of course, here on the podcast, but also over on my social media pages. So make sure you're following me, y'all. My handle is at Life Edit Project, all one word in all the places. So go follow me and ask me what's up with the giveaway and we'll celebrate. I'll make sure you know when we cross that milestone and so that you know how to enter. Okay. So I think that wraps up the housekeeping. We're done with the appetizers, y'all. Let's get to the main course and let's talk about discipline, shall we? So, we've been talking about self-care for the last few weeks here on the podcast because I'm very passionate about self-care. And as a life coach, I'm also an advocate for self-care. I have coached well over 100 people individually. And one thing that I've seen over and over again, especially among my clients who tend to be high achievers, is that high achievers consistently neglect themselves in some capacity, either for the sake of reaching some type of goal or achievement or for the sake of taking care of others. And of course, the irony is that the long-term effects of that neglect often becomes their greatest obstacle to sustaining the success they desire or to them being able to consistently care for others. So I decided to take a deeper dive into a few particular aspects of self-care with this mini-series that I'm calling Self-Care Essentials, because quite frankly, I just think there's so much that isn't being said or emphasized. Now, I don't mean to say that no one out there is talking about self-care, because there's actually a crap ton of chatter out there on the interwebs about self-care, but a lot of it is kind of the same. Or rather, a lot of that talk is covering the same ground. So I wanted to take a different path and explore some different areas of self-care. And I wanted to offer what I think is a less common perspective on self-care. So in case you need this recap, maybe you're just finding us here. So in part 1 of the Self-Care Essentials mini-series, we talked about boundaries, and we talked about them as a foundational skill that you need to be able to carry out almost every other type of self-care activity there is, right? So first is boundaries. Then in part 2, we talked about rest and the different kinds of rest we all need, but also how easy it is to fool ourselves into thinking that we're resting when we're not. And this week, we're talking about discipline, and specifically, we're talking about self-discipline, right? And I know that it can be an intimidating topic and it's very easy to shy away from, but that's exactly why we can't afford to leave it unaddressed. Now, I am curious, what comes to mind for you when you hear the word discipline, and how does it make you feel? For me, I tend to think of one of two things. I either think of a child being disciplined by a parent, or I think of like someone waking up at 5 a.m. every day to go running. And to me, neither of those images feels good. So when I imagine the scenario of a child being disciplined by a parent, I'm usually imagining myself as the child, and the discipline is being conveyed as like some type of punishment or scolding. And like the feeling that invokes in me is actually a bit of shame. And the other image, when I think of someone getting up to run at 5 a.m., like that, the thought of getting up at 5 a.m. just automatically, it's an automatic no for me. It's a no for me, sis, because 5 a.m. just means sleep deprivation to me because I tend to go to bed fairly late. So I avoid getting up earlier than I have to. Also, running long distances is not my exercise style of choice. So for both of these scenarios that my mind comes up with when I think of discipline, they are both unpleasant. And if you are anything like me and your mind conjures up equally unpleasant images and feelings when you think about discipline, then you might have an unconscious aversion to the idea of discipline or to the idea of being a disciplined person. And that is something that's worth noting and exploring, because when you can only associate unpleasantness with discipline, you end up missing out on so many of the benefits of discipline. Now, before we go any further, let me give you the Coach Elizabeth definition so that we are all on the same page. And if you are writing notes, this is where you start writing, because this is important. And if you're not taking notes, what is wrong with you? Get your life together. Okay, so the Coach Elizabeth definition for discipline is the practice of regulating oneself or one's environment for the sake of improvement or achieving a goal. I'll say it again. Discipline is the practice of regulating oneself or one's environment for the sake of improvement or achieving a goal. So with that definition, one thing that I hope jumps out at you is that discipline doesn't have to be inherently unpleasant. And the point of discipline is not to deny yourself the things and experiences that you want or like. Quite the opposite. Discipline is actually a way of showing up day to day and moment to moment so that you end up getting exactly what you want out of life. Discipline is empowering, and I submit to you that discipline can even be indulgent because it literally becomes the path to indulging in an abundance of something that you really desire and enjoy by foregoing indulgence in something that is only mildly satisfying or mediocre. This is also a good time for me to mention that I kind of have this obsession with telling my coaching clients that they get to have the things that they want in life. I encourage all of my clients to really lean into their desires and to use them as a kind of compass to help them find their path through certain life situations. And I believe that our desires can be leveraged as fuel to propel us forward. And when you're a high achiever, and if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are. When you're a high achiever with big goals and a desire to live a big life, whatever that means to you, having a destination to strive toward and fuel to keep you moving down that path is absolutely a form of self-care. And discipline then becomes like an energy efficient vehicle that you can use to move down that path and to get to where you want to be. But what does discipline look like if it doesn't have to look like punishing ourselves or skipping all the fun things in life or waking up at the butt crack of dawn, right? I am so glad you asked. I want to propose to you that there are 7 elements of discipline, and you can mix and match them to bring discipline into any area of your life that you want to improve or to help you reach any goal that you have. So here are the 7 elements of discipline: consistency, constraint, control, consciousness, cause, character, and choice. So this is just a reminder. This is my unique take on discipline. You're not going to find this anywhere else on the interwebs in this format or proposed like this. And this is also my unique take on discipline as a form of self-care specifically. And because it's my unique take and I'm a big fan of alliteration, that is also why all of these elements start with the letter C. So I hope you enjoy that. Okay, so we are going to go through these 7 elements one by one, and I'm going to give you a few examples of what this looks like along the way. First up is consistency. So I think consistency is one of the things we tend to associate with the concept of discipline, no matter what ideas or feelings it conjures up for you, right? But here's how I want you to think of consistency in the context of discipline. Consistency means showing up reliably and regularly, even in the face of non-ideal conditions. It's easy to show up when things are easy, but life isn't always easy. And so we have to develop the skill of showing up even when it's tough or even when it's inconvenient and even when you have a valid excuse to not show up if you want to get what you want. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to be on team no days off, right? I'm not over here preaching hustle culture. No. There are absolutely times when not showing up is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. But learning to show up in the face of obstacles is a requirement for getting what you want, because life is not set up to hand you what you want on a silver platter with no work required. So consistency has to be the first element of discipline. Next up is constraint. Constraint in the context of discipline means limiting yourself to an environment or to a set of choices that serves you and your goals. Now, this doesn't have to mean no fun. It means setting yourself up for success. So the simplest example I can give you for this has to do with food. And I love examples with food because we all eat, and so they tend to, be very accessible and understandable. So let's say you have a goal to be healthier. And one thing that would help you be healthier is to eat less processed foods. If you tend to have a habit of snacking on a bag of chips at night while you're watching TV, a simple way you could discipline yourself would be to constrain the snack options that you have in your house. So the next time you go grocery shopping, you just don't buy the chips. That way, even though you have the urge to reach for the bag of Doritos or that bag of Cheetos when you're watching Netflix, you can't eat them because they aren't even in the pantry. That is constraint. Or let's say you want to stop wasting so much time on social media because you find that you are mindlessly scrolling and you waste 3 hours a day on social media when you don't even realize it, right? So you could constrain yourself by deleting your social media apps from your phone so that you literally cannot just mindlessly open the apps and scroll whenever you have the urge to pick up your phone, right? That is what constraint looks like, setting yourself up for success. It's not about denying yourself anything. It's literally about keeping yourself on track for what it is that you actually want. The third element of discipline is control. So control is my take on combining the ideas of reactive discipline and proactive discipline. So control is deciding how to respond to the things that are outside of your control and taking the initiative to control or influence the things that are within your power. For example, let's say you have the goal of being on time for work. You can't control traffic, but if you want to be on time for work, what you can control is what time you leave your house in the morning and what route you take to get to work. Right? So that's an example of taking the initiative to control what is within your power. Or let's say you have a goal to be in a more peaceful relationship. You can't control your spouse, right? And if your spouse is in a bad mood, you can't control their mood. But what you can control is not how they feel or what they say to you, but you can control how you engage with them. And you can control the extent to which their mood impacts your mood, right? So control is about taking ownership of what is within your control. Hey there. I hope you're enjoying this conversation about self-care and that you're taking away some practical tips on how you can improve your own self-care regimen. But real talk, sometimes the best way to help yourself is to get support from someone else. And the best, most effective way I can support you is through a private, one-on-one coaching relationship. When you hire me as your life coach, we'll have time to uncover, unpack, and explore your needs and challenges, whatever they might be. To get started, use the link in the show notes to book a free sales call with me, and let's talk about how my one-on-one coaching services can help you supercharge your self-care, unbusy your life, and create balance in any area of life and within yourself. I can't wait to work with you. Okay, back to the show. Next up is consciousness. So this element of discipline is about bringing hidden behaviors or choices into your consciousness or your awareness so that you can influence them. There are so many things in our lives, so many situations that we don't like and that we wouldn't actually have to deal with if we were only more aware of the patterns that play into sustaining them. So, story time. I remember being a freshman in college, and I was living in the dorms. I had a roommate, and she ended up being a wonderful, amazing friend. But my freshman year in college was like many freshmen. It was my first time that I was essentially living on my own. So I was spending my own money and setting my own schedule, and more importantly, buying my own groceries. Now, I was a fairly responsible and mature young adult in my freshman year, and I was really proud of the fact that I had earned enough in scholarships that my tuition, room, and board was covered, and I didn't need extra money from my parents. I knew a lot of other freshmen that, they needed their parents to put money into their bank account every week or every month, and I didn't need that. And I could afford to eat real food. Like, I didn't have to just survive on ramen noodles and cheap pizza, right? Like, I could buy real groceries. And so I loved going to the grocery store and buying groceries because it made me feel very grown up. And one of the things that I would buy all the time was a half gallon of cookies and cream ice cream because I loved ice cream. And because I could afford it, I would keep a half gallon in my freezer in my dorm room. And the best part was that I didn't have to share it with anyone because my roommate had her own food, right? So I would often when I wanted ice cream, I would just grab the container and eat it right out of the container. Now, this was a bad habit. I do not recommend. 0 out of 10, right? And so even though I was pretty active and I would exercise and I was always walking 1,000 miles across campus, by the end of the year, I had put on a little bit of weight, something like the freshman 15. And I realized that it was almost entirely due to me overindulging in ice cream. So the next year, I decided to do something different. Instead of telling myself that I wasn't allowed to have ice cream, because remember, discipline is not about denying yourself what you want, I simply raised the act of eating ice cream into my consciousness so that I could be more disciplined. So instead of buying ice cream to keep in my freezer, I would tell myself when I wanted ice cream, I had to go to an ice cream shop and buy a single serving of ice cream. And this meant that it was literally impossible for me to eat more ice cream than I realized, because I couldn't just pull it out of the container and tell myself that I was only eating 1 serving when in actuality I was eating 3, right? It was impossible to trick myself into underestimating how often I was eating and how much I was eating, because the entire act of getting in a car or getting on the bus, whatever, and going to the ice cream store could only be carried out consciously. I was more aware of what I was doing, which allowed me to be more disciplined with what I did. Next up is cause. And this element of discipline is about knowing your why and keeping your goal top of mind. When you have a cause, when you have an improvement, a specific improvement that you want to make, or a specific achievement that you want to reach, being disciplined is so much easier. And also, it's more rewarding because your cause is the reward for your discipline. At the end of the day, you can have anything you're disciplined enough to get and sustain, whether that be 6-pack abs, an 800 credit score, a Pinterest-worthy clean house, or, in my case, a weekly podcast with a growing audience. You can have whatever you want if you have the discipline for it. Okay? Next on my list is character. So I believe the element of character can really simplify the concept of discipline for some of you and even take some of the sting out of it. So as I've already mentioned, we tend to think of discipline as something that keeps us away from what we want. But I want to invite you to think of discipline as allowing you to be a truer version of yourself instead. So what if discipline is about reminding yourself of who you want to be in any given moment? It's not about thinking, do I want to do this workout? What if it's about deciding, do I want to be the kind of person that prioritizes my fitness in this way? And it's not about deciding, do I want to give this guy my phone number? It's about asking maybe, do I want to be the kind of person that associates with this type of guy? And instead of it being about, do I want to cook dinner or order takeout? Maybe a better question is, what kind of example do I want to model for my children with this choice? So it's not about getting yourself to do the quote unquote right thing. It's about owning the parts of your character that have been revealed by every choice you've made in the past, and then developing the character you want with every new decision you make. That is discipline. Discipline is about becoming the person you want to be. Ooh, I like that. And that leads us right into the final element of discipline, which is choice. Choice, it ain't complicated, y'all. It means to make decisions and act on them. So often we fail to embody the other elements of discipline, like consistency, constraint, or control, because we haven't actually chosen what we want to improve, or because we haven't chosen a goal. We haven't decided that goal is what we want. And let me be real clear. Lean in, sis, so that you don't miss it. Desiring something is not the same as deciding to have it. So when you find yourself flip-flopping and only halfway going for your goals, it is because you have chosen to remain where you are. Discipline, in the absence of a decision to persevere and succeed, is futile. It ain't giving what you think it's gonna give. Right? You have to choose to allow yourself to get what it is that you want. And then you can cultivate discipline to take you there. Okay. That's all for today, homies. I hope this was helpful to you, as always. I will be back in your ears next week with the fourth and final installment of our Self-Care Essentials series, so be sure you tune back in for that. Until then, I invite you to care for yourself in a deep, authentic way by cultivating the discipline you need to get and keep the desires of your heart. All right? Peace. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Life Edit Project podcast. I'd love to hear what your favorite moment or key takeaway was from this conversation. You can send me a message on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter to let me know. My handle is @LifeEditProject, all one word, in all the places. My social media is linked up in the show notes to make it easy for you. Holla at your girl. I'll be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, don't just stay busy with the life you have. Get busy creating the life you want.